And now we'll pick up where we're talking about some settings here and the effect that they're going to have on things when you create them. And the ones that I want to specifically talk about are these object linking selections. Over here on the right-hand side, there's a right-hand column of settings under object linking, and they are to link points with the coordinate file. And by that, we mean that if you should move the point in the drawing, it will trigger a change in the external CRD file and will actually update that file automatically. Now, this is a setting that uh, pretty much doesn't matter a whole lot anymore. It used to be pretty crucial because they didn't uh, give you a warning about things. It was just if you had your linking turned on, then anytime a point moved in the drawing, it would update in the CRD file without telling you about it. And if it was not on, if you moved the point in the drawing, it did not update the CRD file, in which case you would move things around the drawing and you come back in, you later go to print out or stake out your points or do something, or if you redraw the points from the coordinate file, they would come in at a different location back in the original location if they had not been updated. So you had to sort of keep track of that all by yourself, and you turn this linking on, which would uh, make sure that they get linked together. Now, when you move a point, it's going to recognize that they no longer match, and it's going to pop up a little warning message. So that one is less crucial than it used to be. But you can see how you might want them to be either on or off, because some people like to work with points. They bring these points in, and then if a point gets in the way, they like to just, while it's in the drawing, they'll just shove it out of the way, move it slightly, from where it is, and then know that they can go back to the coordinate file and redraw the point at its original location. Well, that's fine, except if somebody else is working on the same drawing in between times that you are, and they have this setting set to automatically update and yours is set to not update. So you can see how the confusion might come about in that particular instance. But like I said, now they have it set to pop up a warning anytime that happens. So it's less crucial than it used to be. Now, the next setting is a pretty interesting and nice one. If you have drawn line work based on going to a particular point, either if you snapped to a point or if you have used a point number. And what this means is that should the point location change, it will update the line work to follow along with that. We'll see how that works in just a minute when we draw a couple of examples. Because and this particular linking is one directional, meaning that if you change the point location, the line work will update. But if you change the line, like just do a grip edit of the line, it will not pull the points with it. And in fact, anytime then you come back into where it has had to have refreshed from the coordinate file, then it's going to change that line back to what it was. So we'll see that effect here in a minute. Linking labels with line work. That means anytime you've drawn line work and you have labeled it, and by labeling, I'm talking about actual measured annotation, where the command has read the geometry and it has placed measurements on there, like a a bearing and a distance along a line, or a dimension. Let's say you've drawn a building or a house or something on a property drawing, and you've dimensioned those excuse me, those particular measurements. Then if that linking is on when you create the labeling, then it will update when the geometry of the drawing changes, the labeling will recompute and go along for the ride. Same thing, linking line work with center lines. So if you have created a center line file out of some drawn line work, then this is a two-way link so that if you edit the centerline file by typing in some different numbers in the file, once you save and exit the editor, it will redraw the line work. Or if you just grip edit the line work inside the CAD system, just using a CAD command, then it will automatically update the centerline file. Grouping the point entities. And again, we'll talk about what point entities are. They are essentially a point, excuse me, a CAD point and an attribute block, the point number, elevation, and description, and a symbol. So there are three components to a point, and that's what it means to group those entities so that when you select one of those items, it's going to select the whole thing as a group. Okay, and then maintaining the coordinate history file. This lets you roll back any changes you may have made to coordinates. So any type of edits or moving or deletions or draw locate, any of those kind of computing results that result in a particular point in a location, it keeps track of all that, and you can roll that back through the point history if you like. It's sort of an undo back to this point, and without having to actually change parts of the drawing, it will just affect the coordinate changes, but not the drawing itself. Now, this final little section down below this, removing arcs. Remove arcs by a particular method, either the maximum offset or the chord length method. And I'm going to try to sketch out what I'm talking about here. Is when you, if you have a, oops, sorry, let me say okay to that. And if I have a file, let's go with something like this. And let's put a, let's put a curve there, and let's type AirView Res 20,000. Okay. So if I have one of these, and then if I draw something like this, okay, so so what we have here would be, I'm going to go ahead and give it a little more width on that so you can see it. If this were a, now right now they're both two-dimensional polylines. So let's say that's a 2D polyline, or maybe it consists of a bunch of points that we may have measured out in the field, okay? And if these points have elevation, and they're different, let's say this is an elevation of 100, and it gets around to the other end of the curve and has an elevation of 101, okay? So to be able to actually use that to model in our drawing, I have to turn that figure into a 3D polyline so that it can carry the elevations. Otherwise, a 2D polyline can only have a constant elevation. In this case, it's 0. You can see down here my properties to the left. So, but if it were a 3D polyline, it needs to replace this circular arc section, which you can see if I select that original, it has the PC and the PT, and it shows you where the midpoint is, but it's only defined by the start and end point and the radius distance. But to turn that into a 3D element, so you can think about if you're on this arc on the ground and excuse me, and you're sitting at whatever elevation over here where it starts, you get to the end of the curve and maybe it's a foot higher. So imagine you're standing out there on the ground over this and you put your foot down on this point up here, and then you reach over to grab this point and you raise it up in the air a foot or 5 feet or whatever. So now when you're looking at the resulting thing that you've just created by pulling that point up in the air, and you have to look at it perpendicular to the plane that it lies in, well, it's no longer a circular arc. It's actually been stretched. But when we look at it in plan view in our drawing, we're looking at it still from the original plan view direction. It still looks like a circular arc, but it's not, and it can't be defined with differing elevations as any type of a thing because it's a stretched out arc. And so the only way that the CAD system can represent that is by converting it into something like this, where it goes along the same elevations for the straight parts. It hits the curve and it says, now I need to go from this elevation down to this elevation on the end. And I need to represent that with a series of little chords along that curve. So how do you want me to create this chorded approximation of that arc? And that's what we're looking at right here in our remove arcs. The method to use is either a maximum offset or a chord length. Now, the maximum offset is this value right here. Perpendicular. All right, so there's your maximum offset value. And the chord length value would be, say, from here to here, it would be, whatever those numbers are. And I just drew these to represent, what's going on. So as it turns out, the distance away, if I use, when I have this value here for a maximum offset, I'm telling it that I want you to put however many little chord segments that you need to use around this arc and place them such that the maximum amount of variation away from that arc is going to be 2/100ths in this, or whatever it has that you've set it to. Now, the other option is if you use the chord length, then that means place as many of the little segments around that curve that you need to, such that each of those chords is no longer than whatever length you specify. Okay. It's just a preference. I have found this is a really good sort of mid-level that keeps things close enough to being on the original arc to where you can't really see the difference, but it doesn't make so many of them that you get, a billion little points along there, because what happens when you have this, when it converts that into a 3D polyline and you're going to use that to do your terrain modeling, then every one of these vertices that you see there, that it places, all of the endpoints of all those little chorded segments, they are going to be the corner of a triangle, and usually probably 3 or 4 triangles. So the more that you have, the denser and more complex your surface will be. And the fewer that you have, then the further away from approximating that circle would be. So you could have things to be, say, as let's see, put it here, and then we'll go to say there, and then we'll go to there. So, it could be something. Let's take this to the midpoint of. I see it could have done something like that if my numbers were too large and I allowed that to happen. But so that keeps the number of triangles small, but it also gives me a much greater difference in the actual 3D geometry and what it should look like in plan view. So it should look like the white original in a circular arc. The green one has too few points because those numbers were too big. And the red one, though, is, a little more reasonable as to the number of triangles that it's going to form around that curved feature. Okay. So that's what those numbers mean. And those are the values that I found work out pretty nicely. So a maximum offset of 2/100ths, you can barely see that. Certainly you can't build it any closer than that. Or a chord length, but I find it easier to visualize by using the maximum offset method. Don't, because a big flat curve, if you're using a chord length so that every time it converts to a 3D polyline, the chord lengths are always the same, then, depends on how large the curve is and how flat it is or how tight it is, how large a delta is involved is going to be, you a bit problematic, because a nice flat large curve with a standard chord length would be very close to the original. But if that curve was really acute and it went through a large delta angle, then that chord length would be would wind up with a greater separation away from the arc than it would be if it were a flatter curve. So that's why I like the maximum offset, because that's always going to be the most, that 3D converted line is going to be away from that 2D original geometry. So now let's talk about this object linking here a bit. And I'll show you what they mean. So if we have a series of points, let's go to, I'm going to close this file, and let's open or start a new file if you have not done so. Go ahead and start a new file. We'll run through the wizard here. Now I'm going to, at this point, I've always just said exit. But let's go to what the wizard's going to do for us here. If I go to my new drawing name up here at the top and I choose the set button over here on the side, I'm going to look right up here's that starting folder that I told it in my startup settings to start in. Well, I'm going to go to a different location. I'm going to, now if you hit the browse button, you're going to go out to the Windows type browse, and that's fine if you want to use that. I like this one here. I've gotten used to it because it gives me a few extra things in certain file types. You can see it has previews and all that. So I'm going to go to the folder that I've set up to hold my sample data for our class here, my 2024-02-22 survey class. And that was my subfolder. So I've double clicked inside that subfolder, and it has two subfolders inside of it. So I'm going to go into my data sets. I'll double click there. And now I can see all of these different drawing files that are up here. And this is if I were to choose one of these, I'm trying to create a drawing, so it's going to ask me if it's okay to overwrite them. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be in that location. And now I'm going to give it a file name up here with a new file name. I'm just going to call it class example for linking. Let me put it so you can actually see the letters. And I'll say open. Okay, so now I've set that. I've got my English drawings. I'm in 50 scale. Let's put that to, so a 20 scale, a symbol plot size of 0.1, hex plot, and I'll be in, doesn't matter, VA South. And I'll say next. And now it's going to come up, and it's the next step in the wizard is going to say, okay, here's your data path. And what about a coordinate file? Now, you don't actually have to have a coordinate file at all. You don't have to use Carlson points. We're going to. So we're going to tell it a coordinate file. Now, I don't have anything in this coordinate file yet, so I'm going to say new. Okay, and it's going to offer by file name to match the same name as my drawing and put a .crd extension on it. Again, it doesn't have to be the same name, but that's what it is by offer. I'll take that. It's going to be a new file, and I can then also, as part of this process, import points already here. I can do that later if I need to. I'm just going to say no import, and then I'm going to say next. And it's going to go through and come back up, and here's now my settings. I've got a particular list of, I've got some general folders, and I've got all of these survey type folders, or I'm sorry, layers, not folders. So I'm going to sit on, oh, let's see if I can find a particular layer that we like. AV, um, let's try a VSSWR, V sanitary sewer layer. I'm just going to make that my current layer. It's color 150. It has a continuous line style. Now you would possibly want to make that a line style that showed what a sewer line looks like, but you know, you get the idea. So we're just going to sit there, and it doesn't matter. And if you used a different drawing template, that's fine too. You don't have to have this to match. None of this matters. I'm just doing that to show you some of the things you might do if you're making a new drawing. You can use it on layer 0 right now. That's fine. So now we're going to talk about some of this linking. So I want to go to a particular spot in my world. I'm going to type zoom, and I'm going to type C, the letter C, to center. And I'm going to center at coordinate 5,000, 5,000. And I'm not going to set a Z elevation, so I'll just leave that part off. It's optional. I will hit enter. And now it's going to ask me for a zoom factor or a view height. And by the angle brackets telling me that's my default number. And that's because the last time I ran it, that's what it was. But what this number means in my view height is the height of, you know, how far along the ground is it from near the bottom of the graphics window to the top of the graphics window. So I want to make that say 200. So it's going to be 200 feet. I'll hit enter. Now, if I move my cursor around, sort of in the center of the screen, and I'm going to look down here on the bottom of the screen, down here at the status bar, and I'm going to verify that it's somewhere close to 5,000, 5,000. Looks like it is. And if I come down here and get down toward the bottom, I see I'm at 4987 X. I want to look at the Y coordinate. So it's X comma Y. So 4902-ish. So I'm close to 4,900 down there. And if I come up here to the top, I should be up near 5,100. And there it is, 5098. So that's that 200. So I've got like, if I were to draw a line here, say from, say here to here, then that should be close to 200 units long. I'll select it. I'll look in my properties, which I have docked on the side, and I see its length is in fact 197.1582. So that's perfectly legit. All right, so I've got that there. Now, we're going to set some points, and we're going to go to our points menu and look at our point defaults real quick. And I'm going to set a couple of default values that I want to use from here on out. I'm going to use that symbol. I'm going to use this number 2 layout. I will use descriptions and elevations. Locate on the real Z axis. I will look to have point numbers, automatic point numbers, starting with point 1. What layer do I want my points to go on? I'm going to choose the select button, and I'm going to find a layer called V node. And if I'm on sewer points right now, I might scroll down here and find, utility or sanitary sewer, but I'll just put them on V dash node. You can put them on, leave them on points. That's fine. I'm going to draw the point nodes. That is the AutoCAD point entity as part of that point thing, that point object. So I will draw those as well. And I think that's the only thing I'm going to have checked on here. No vertical angle, no separate layers, no GIS file. I'm going to say, okay, that's my defaults. I'll now go to the points menu again and choose draw locate points. And so now my defaults have set everything up here for me. And I'm going to choose screen pick, and I'm just going to pick, say, points up near the corners. I'm going to pick one up here, and I'm going to give that, it's asking me for a point elevation. Let's give that an elevation of 101.56, for instance. Oops, I got a 101.56. A point description, we'll call it, just call it UL for upper left. Okay, so there it is. The point got created. Now it's still asking me again to pick a point, and it's going to keep asking me until I finish by hitting enter. So I'm going to pick a point up here near the upper right. I'll click up there, and it wants to know the elevation. And again, it's taking the last value and offering that to me as a default. I can use that just by hitting enter. Or there's two other options. I can text or snap. If I said snap, then if I had something else drawn in the drawing that was at some 3D elevation, I snapped to that particular point on that entity, it would read its elevation and set that as the elevation of this point. Also by text, it would then prompt me to pick some text in the drawing, and what it will do is read that text, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be all numbers. It can be anything as long as it has numbers in it, and it will find the numbers and read that as the elevation to use. So that's a couple of options that you can use. And if you choose those options, you have to, next time you run this command, you have to probably reset it back to enter. So you would choose the E option down here on the command line if you had chosen one of these others different ones. So right now it's there. I'm going to give this one a an elevation of 99.99. And I'm going to call that one UR for my upper right. I'm going to click down in the lower right, give that an elevation of, let's keep it the same. I'll just hit enter. And I'm going to call that one LR for lower right. And I'm going to pick over near the lower left, and I'm going to say that's going to have an elevation of, say, 100.82, doesn't matter. And that's going to be my lower left. And just for good measure, we're going to place one right in the middle hereabouts, and we'll call that, let's say, at 102. We'll just leave it 102, the elevation. And we're going to just call that one C for center. Or let's call it CTR. Enter. And now notice it still says point to create, so I have to finish by hitting enter one more time. So now I've got 5 points. Okay. Now, and again, there's that text style. If I wanted to, I could change the style command, which I will do. Just because it's a little neater. I'm just weird that way. All right, so I've got 5 points. And here's where we get into some um, real benefits from the Carlson software. If you were to draw a polyline, let's say I want to draw a polyline that basically goes from point 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and then back to 1. The AutoCAD way of doing that is just to draw a polyline, or the P-line command. Okay. Start of the polyline. Well, I have to either type a coordinate value by typing the X, comma, Y, optionally, comma, Z value, or I have to snap to that particular point. Now, because I've drawn this with a Carlson point and it has a symbol, if I were to just hover over this, say uh, like this, I can be, if I click there, or let's see, let's try that. So if I just, if I pick there, you notice I didn't get the center of the point. I got the edge of the actual symbol. So what I would have to do in this case would be to actually bring up my node snap, or turn my node snap on, and then find that node. And that would take me, and then I would do the same thing around the corner. Now I've got a couple of things here. With Carlson, under settings, I have this point object snap on and off. I just turned it off, so I'm going to turn it back on. So now it's on, except now I just turned it back off again. So let's turn it on. So now, because it's on, if I point to, even just see, if I point to that piece of text out there, notice it's popping up, and it's recognizing that it is a coordinate. It's point number 2, that northing value, that easting value, that elevation, the description, and it tells you that it came from a file called class example for linking, and it came from the command called draw locate. So if I click there, that goes to 2. But now what if I wanted to go to point 3 and then point 4? See, it's asking me down here, next point. Well, I can't just type 3, right? If I do 3, what happens? Well, nothing. See, it didn't go anywhere. So I would have to do, let's say, all right, I did grab the point. Now, if I wanted to go back here and let's just go to the node snap. And then I could see to close. Oops. C to close. There we go. All right, so now I've drawn this and it actually goes, oh, look at there. I've got a bump point in here somewhere. I must have clicked. All right, so I'm going to just click, select the grip. So I'm going to hover the mouse over that grip and I'm going to remove that vertex. So I didn't want to do that one. All right. So now that's one way of creating that. That is a polyline. I see up here, it tells me it's a polyline. And it was done with a little bit of extra effort by snapping to the nodes or snapping to the points and all of that. Now, if I were to move these points a little bit, let's move this first point. I'm going to select that point. And now this time I'm going to grab the grip at the point symbol, and I'm just going to move it up here. And it says, oh, hey, you know what? You just moved it. Do you want to update the coordinate file? I'll say yes. So off it goes. Now, what happened to the line? It stayed with it. It stayed where it was, I mean. That was, if I look at Carlson configure, general settings, but I said I want to link line work with points. Well, it didn't follow that point, did it? But if I move this one, yes, I'll update that one. See, none of that stuff is actually moving because I used a an AutoCAD command to draw the line. And there's no reason you can't do that, but this is one of the fundamental differences in the Carlson versions of commands that you're familiar with and the CAD versions is that the Carlson versions will almost always allow you to use point numbers. In fact, if we go to the draw menu, and instead of where we had before, we just drew a polyline with the P-line command, and that's this down here, standard polyline. I'm going to go to the draw menu, and I'm going to choose to draw a 2D polyline. Now, this is going to come up and have a bunch of options set for me. If I have this unchecked, I don't want to see the options on startup, then I have to pick them from the command line down below, which is okay. But I can set a specific elevation, or I can tell it to use the elevation by whatever I snap to as my first point. I can even tell it to automatically correct for 90-degree corners. So if I'm drawing it, say a building outline and I want it to be square corners, I can just be close and it will automatically correct it into 90 degrees. So make sure you have that off if you don't want it to do that. You can annotate the closed pad so it can draw the areas and all kinds of things for it. You can also use the current drawing properties. So whatever you have set, whatever layer you're on, whatever line type, line weight, color, etc. Or you can uncheck that and you can choose to put these on different layers. So I'm going to put it on that same layer as that one. I'm going to set my color to be, well, we'll leave this one to be green. So it's not going to be a color by layer, it's going to be color by green. Now, it says, look at the prompt, notice the difference. Pick a point, and that was what the polyline command said. It said next point. So I could either just pick a point or type the values. But now it says pick a point or point numbers. Right there's a huge difference. So the point numbers I want to use is I want to go from 1. So I hit 1, hit enter. And where do I go next? Well, I don't have to go to number. I'll put a couple of little things in here. And now I'm going to say 2. So I'm going to go to 2. And so now I want to go to 3 and 4. So I'm just going to say 3-4. So go from 3 to 4. So it goes down to 3, over to 4, and I'll type, oh, heck, let's go to 5. I should have said 3-5. And now let's say C to close. All right, so now I've got this green line now that was created with a Carlson command that used a point location as part of creating the line. So now if I move those points, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to go up here and select this point. I'm going to move it over to here. Yes, I'll update it. Notice the line goes with it. I'm going to move my center point, say over, let's put it down there. Yes, I'll update it. The line goes with it. Okay. But now what happens if you do this? Let's say I'm going to select this, and this particular point was used, but I'm going to just grip edit the polyline and move these grips. I'm going to make them pretty significant here. Okay, so they're now moved off of there. And that's what I said, it's a one-way link, it's not a two-way link. So I moved the line, but the points didn't follow. But here's where you got to be careful with this, is because let's say you've managed to do that. You've drawn some line work that went through point numbers, and then you just did a grip edit on that line work. So, but if you have linking is on, like we have it set now for link line work with points, then anytime the point file would change, I'm going to just double click it, double click one of those points, and I'm just going to make a change to it. I'll give it a different symbol. I'll say, okay, now watch what happens. You see how that pulled that line back? Okay, because that point changed and it pulled the line work back to it. Same thing as if number 5. In fact, I think if I go to, say, edit points and I bring the actual, let's see, CTR, let's just say 1, we'll give it that. We'll say, and if I say save and exit, I guess I have to actually, just make that as a specific change, save it, save the file. Okay, so it has to actually change the point itself. So, and it could be any change. It could be just something just slight, and then I could even, put it right back. So I put a 1 on that originally, like that. And if I go back and now put it to, take that back off, make it a 0. All right, so now I've made the change. The coordinate file has been changed, but it hasn't updated this yet. But if I were to redraw that point or make some change that forced it to redraw, like changing that symbol, then it's going to go back and honor that linking. Same thing as if I moved that point again, even though I gripped it the first time. So if the linking is turned on when you draw that line, it has that behavior. It's so that it will follow the points and the points change. And even to the point of being, not a position change, just a cosmetic change. In fact, I need to double click that and change its deep and deep and say, okay. All right. So that is there, but be careful if you do that with the linking on and you grip edit the line work, that you're be aware whether the linking was on when the line was created. And if it was, then it's going to always be linked. You can't just go back and uncheck that switch and now this line behaves as if it wasn't created with the switch. It's whatever is in play at the time the entity was created, is the way all of this stuff works. Okay. So now some of the other things, if I, let's just move that, say, up to here, and let's do an annotation on that. Let's go to the annotate menu and let's just choose auto annotate and just take the defaults and say okay, and we'll pick that. And I see that it read, the bearing and the distance and placed them there on this line work. Now, this was the other linking, was linking labels with line work. So if I select that and say move this up, notice, now keep an eye on those values. I had 176, and it was a north O2. It was almost a due north at 176 and almost a due east or west at 336. So if I click up here now, notice it recomputes and redisplays the annotation automatically because I had it linked. Same thing as if I had my area by closed polyline. Right there. And then if I go back and do the same thing, notice my area values changed with that label as well. So that's also a label that was generated based on the geometry of that line work. So that's what linking labels with line works does. Okay. Now let's learn another couple little things that the draw command can do for us. We draw a 2D polyline, and this time I'm going to just change my color to red. Say okay. And I'm just going to pick a couple of points out here in space. I've got some and I'll come down here. Now I'm going to go to using some points. I'm going to go say 5-3, which means it's going to go from point 5 to 4 to 3. And I'll come out here. And now one of my options, look down here on this line, it says F to follow. So if I want to follow this figure, okay, so I'm going to follow another polyline. And it wants me to pick the first follow point. So I'm going to follow from here. And it asks if I want to interpolate those vertices as I go around for elevations. I'm going to say no, because it's all just a 2D. And it says wants to know the last point or a distance, which I could type a distance. Well, I'm going to go up to this point. Okay. Now it says, is this correct? Now, the reason it says this, and it doesn't always, it will only say this is if the polyline you choose to follow is closed, meaning I give it a starting point, I give it an ending point, and if I said, if it chooses that as the route, it asks me, is that correct? If I say no, if I type N for no, and then it says, okay, well, then is that the route? Because that is a route from the point I said start at and go to, and that would work. And I could say no again and say, now it is correct. I'm going to say yes. And now I can just keep going and do various things. Okay. I can type a D for distance, and I can put them in meters, feet, chains, lengths, rods, or a pick. Let's just go with feet are in my angle brackets. I see those less than and greater than signs. So the distance will be, let's just go 100 feet. And what method do I want to use to define the direction? So if I were to type C for cursor, then it's going to go 100 feet from the last place I left off in the direction of where the cursor is sitting right now. And it would just follow that direction. Or I could type A for angle, which is in my angle bracket, so I could just hit enter. And now it wants to know a code. Well, there's your code. Read the line above it, and it tells you the little cheat sheet for your codes. You've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 are your quadrants around the circle. If it's northeast, it's a code 1. Southeast is 2, southwest is 3, northwest is 4. Or if I say 5, that means I want to use an azimuth as my angle. Or if it's 6 or 7, that means I want to turn an angle left or an angle right. Or if it's 8 or 9, that means I want to turn a deflection left or a deflection right. So if I say an angle right was my code 7, now remember where I was up here where I left off, and back here's where I was previously. So that's basically your backside point. This is your occupied point. So I'm going to say an angle right of 7, and I'm going to say 90 degrees. So it should be sitting here, looking here, turn 90 degrees and go 100 feet. So there's my 90 degrees. There it is. Now I'm going to say, notice it's still in distance mode. So I'm going to go another 100 feet. Okay, I'm going to choose by angle. And again, angle right. And so this time I'm sitting here, looking back here, and I want to turn an angle right of, let's go say 270. And there it is. And I can type Q to quit. So that quits me out of the distance entering method. And it brings me back to, let me just go on and finish this up. And I can type C to close that figure if I wanted to. Okay. So there now I have a couple of really nice ways of extending that. If I had to draw this and I had to jump to that corner and that corner and that corner, and then come up here and jump to that corner and that corner and that corner and that corner, well, that's all well and good. And in this particular case, it wouldn't be that hard to set my snapping up so that I could do that. But if you get something that is, um, way too complex to try to snap, in fact, you might even miss some of the points that are in it. Again, let's go to another example here. Quick second here. Okay, sorry, I just had a message came in that I had to check on real quick. All right, so um, let's as an example, let's do this. Let's open a file. Leave this one open if you've got it going. Now let's just go to File, Open. We're going to open another file. We're going to look at our same data set, and we're going to open up that file called Sample from T3 Global. And we'll say Open. Okay, now, when you get that, it's going to bring up a lot of information here. And we're going to use a couple of things to sort of clean out some of our work area here. So I want to just take a look at the contour lines. So I'm going to isolate some layers. I'm going to go to the View menu now. It's a View function, and I'm going to isolate layers. And that's also, I've got on my layers toolbar that I have up here at the top, this isolate layers right here. Okay. So if I choose that, I want to zoom in here, and I want to pick one of these index contours and one of the intermediate contours, but I also see these dashed ones, and those are on two other layers. It's for obscured contours. So I'm going to pick one of each of those. So I've now identified 4 layers, and I'm going to hit enter, and I've now isolated my drawing to show me that. Okay, now, here's where that example that I was showing you about is really helpful. We have a follow command now in that draw, say 2D polyline. And if I want to say, come in here and say, I'm going to start here and I'm going to come down to here, but now I want to follow this contour line around this little convoluted place till I get out to here a little ways. Okay. So I'm going to choose F to follow, and I'm going to pick this line, that contour line. Now, where do I want to start following? I'll just pick a point, say here, and reading the prompts. Now, this is a one that's real easy to overlook. Do I want to interpolate the follow vertices elevations? I'm going to say no. And that's the reason it's there is if you're drawing 3D line work and if you're following something that has 3D elevations in between it, but in this case, it won't matter. So I'm going to say no. And now it wants to know the last follow point or a distance. So I'm going to just take it over to here. And because it's not closed, it did not ask me if this is right. It just did that. I'll come up here and then say, close the figure. Okay, now, what good is that? We don't often have to do that. But the reason, it saved a lot of effort is look at all of these little, look at all the little vertices that if I tried to snap to the end point of every one of those little endpoints, there's some I might have missed. I might not have noticed, one that's really close or that's say like right in here, I might have seen that as just a straight line segment, although that one's pretty obvious. Maybe this one I would have missed. I would have say gone to that endpoint and come all the way down to this endpoint. Okay, so by using that option to follow, it guarantees you're going to pick up every single aspect of the thing that you are trying to follow in your new geometry. And so that's just one of those examples that can help you, design and do some layouts and some computations. Like you could say, everything from, let's see, let's get an example. This is a, let's see, 1310, and this is 1315. So if I wanted to, say take this 1310 as a floodplain elevation, I might draw around it here and then go all the way down to the bottom. And I think everything else is continuous down lower. Yeah. So you could, set something out there and then follow along that 1310 line all the way around to, say, the edge of your property. Maybe that 1310 line keeps going somewhere else, so I don't want to go everywhere. I'll just stop at a given point, come back around, and I can then draw that figure, and I can then look at its properties and see what its area is, and maybe I have to determine, how many acres do I have within that particular floodplain? So there's, all kinds of practical applications for it. And so I want to encourage you to look at a lot of these different options in the Carlson versions of your CAD type commands. I'm going to close that particular file. I'm not going to save the changes. And we're going to come back here and look at these 5 points that we had, and I'm going to look at the draw command. Let's draw a 3D polyline this time. And I'm going to put it on a layer called 3D BKLN for 3D break line. I'll go ahead and make that a magenta color. And I'm going to turn on to prompt for an elevation or slope. And I'll show you why I'm going to do that. So if I say, okay, I'm going to type 1 as my starting point. Now notice it reads the elevation of 101.56. You see that on the line above. It says, okay, now where are you going to go to the next point? Well, I'm going to go to, say, point 2. And it says, okay, well, when you went to point 2, it read the elevation as 99.99. And its horizontal distance, its slope distance, its slope of negative 0.5%. And that is the elevation that it's going to use because I went to that point number. But if you click somewhere, let's say I'm going to go from point 2 down to point 3, but I'm going to sort of zigzag my way to it. Okay. So if I pick something that does not have an elevation, let's say I pick here, notice it temporarily sits there and says, all right, what's my elevation? See, it read it as 0.0 in the line above, but I can say, well, let me go to the next point or the elevation. I'm going to interpolate along the way. So I'm going to type that or take that angle bracket, interpolate. I'm just going to hit enter to interpolate. So I'm going to interpolate from there. And you notice the line above now says this point elevation will be interpolated upon completion. So let's go from there to there to there to there. And now I'm going to go to point number 3. I'll type 3, enter, and aha, it reads the elevation of next pointer elevation 3. Uh-oh, sorry. Let's undo that. Let's go here. And now the next point, if I type E to elevation of, shoot, I should have messed this up here. All right. Sorry about that. Give me a quick reset on that. Let's repeat that command 3DP. I'm going to go from 1, accept the elevation. I'm going to go to 2, accept that elevation of 99.99. And now I'm going to go to here and I'm going to do the interpolation. So it's now going to be interpolated. And now I'm going to go to 3, which it reads as 99.99. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Oh, yeah, because it was the same elevation. Boy, that was a bad example. So let's interpolate this one, and let's go back and forth this way until we get to 4. Ah, I did it again. Now, if I choose 4 and it reads its elevation, there we go, and I say accept. So now I'll just hit enter to finish. So if I look at this particular point or this particular 3D line, I see, and if I spin this thing up in 3 dimensions, I can see that I'm actually at those exact elevations for those points. But the points, so if I select that and if I hover the mouse in that grip, I see that's 100.82. That's the elevation of point 4. I look at this elevation, hover the mouse, it's 99.99, or so is this one. And therefore, so are all of these ones in between because it interpolated it, but they're the same elevation. All right, so that gave us that. This one is 101.56. Now I'm reading that down here on the bottom of the screen on the status bar when I hover the mouse. There's my 101.56, and that's what that elevation is. Okay. Now, a couple other things that we've got here. If you do not interpolate those elevations in between those as you go along, then it's going to take that click in open space and set the elevation there to 0. Okay. So that's why we do that. And that's what that command gives us the freedom to do, is to, um, have us pick a point. And if we pick on something that has an elevation, use it. Okay. And so, but if it doesn't, then give us the choice. We can also do, let's say we're going to go from here. Let's make a new one, a different color. We'll just go the same route. We're going to go from 1 and now to 2. And now I'm going to go off to the side here and I want to put that at a particular slope. I'm going to do it at a percent slope, and that percent is going to be negative, let's say 2.5%. So minus 2.5. So, oh, good heavens. All right, got some. All right, so 1, there's my elevation. Let's go to 2. There's the elevation. Let's go now to here, and this time I'm going to go by a percent, and that is negative 2.5. And that set that elevation. I'll come over to here, and it keeps that same, but I'm going to go back up at a 2.5, and now I'm going to go down to point number 3, and I'm going to use the elevation of 99.99, and then let's just go to 5, accept that elevation, and we'll finish that. Okay, so now we've got this one that has set, instead of interpolating, I've got a segment here that's down at a 2.5%. It comes up at a 2.5%. It then goes down to this elevation, and then it comes back to that elevation. Now, what are those values? And let's look at both sets of the lines. You go to the inquiry menu, and let's turn on the drawing inspector. So I choose that, and it tells me the drawing inspector is on. I'm reading the line above the command line prompt. And it says right click to activate the pop-up menu. So if I right click, these are the things it's going to tell me when I hover the mouse over the drawn line work. I can see the layer name, I can see the elevation, I can see, let's look at the polyline data also. So I'm going to go down to there and click it with the left mouse button. And now I see it's also on. So as I hover the mouse, right here, I see that is on a layer called 3D BKLN. It has an elevation of 101.411 at horizontal distance slope. You can read all that yourself. The total distance of the overall line, it is open, it's not closed, and it has a first point of point number 1, second point is point number 2 of that segment. If I come down here, and as I move the cursor, I'm not clicking, I'm just sliding the cursor. Notice that the elevation and current distance constantly updates. But you see that slope is negative 2.5%. I get to this slope and it's positive 2.5%. I come back to this slope and it's a negative 0.39% slope, constantly down to that elevation, and then back up at a 1.26% slope. Same thing on the purple line. If I come down here, you see that elevation is 99.99 because 0.2 and 0.3 are both that same elevation. So my slope is 0 all the way along. And now here I've interpolated from 3 to 4. So I'm going to go from 99.99, and you see it keeps climbing up to what's going to be a 100.82, and it is a slope of 0.19%. And you notice no matter where I am along that slope, along that feature, I have a constant slope of positive 0.19% until I get to the end of that. Okay. So now this drawing inspector can remain on even in the middle of other commands. Like you can, go ahead and let's just say draw another uh, set of lines. And then as finish it up, I've still got, these different commands are available to me with my drawing inspector if it's on. I will tell you though that from experience, it can bog you down and sort of get in your way. So I would recommend that you turn it on and off. If you don't need it anymore, turn it back off. And you can do that from the menu choice, or you can do it in this way. Again, it's inquiry drawing inspector, and that's a running command. And if you right click to get the menu up, then you can turn off the drawing inspector right there and it'll go away till you're ready to go. Okay. So that sort of threw a bunch of things in our face here that we can see some of the benefits that I'd like you to consider out of these uh, Carlson type commands, particularly the draw commands and the edit commands, because you've got some modification commands in here. Uh, you've got offset, not only a standard CAD offset, but you can offset to a layer to a given area. So you can offset a polyline to wherever it has to offset so that the area between the original and the offset line is a certain value. You can do multiple offsets so it repeats, variable offset. So you could have, well, give you a quick example of that. Just draw a rectangle anywhere on the screen and get an idea of what our distances are. This distance is, say, from here to here. That is 50 feet. Okay, so you'll be able to see tens and such like that. So if I choose edit offset, variable offset, I want to do this by line. I'll take it by each side. So I'll take that default of line. I'm going to select this polyline to offset. I want to say which side I'm going to go to the outside, for instance. And now it says, all right, for this line, how much? I'm going to say 10 feet. Okay. And now the next line, how far do you want to put the, well, I'm going to put that one at 20 feet. Okay. So when that registers and it goes to the next, it's how far do I want to offset that one? Let's move that one to 5 feet. And then let's bring that one back to 10 feet. And once we're done there. And so now left and right is on the left side, it's 10 feet. On the bottom, it's 10 feet. On the top, it's 20. On the right, it's 5. I didn't have to do 3 different offsets and then trim and join and do all that kind of stuff because that command put it all together in that one aspect. So, that's a okay example with a rectangle, but, a lot of times you might have, say somebody's property, a parcel of land, and it's got, say, a frontage and sides and front setback, rear setback, and side yard requirements. So if we do that command again, I'll repeat that variable offset, go by line, select this. I'll go to the inside this time, and now this is my side distance. I'm going to say my side yards are going to be 15 feet. My rear yard will be 25 feet, back to 15 feet on the side, and then there's my frontage. I'm going to say that needs to be a 40-foot frontage setback. All right, so that's not a very, actually, that was a little too tight. Let's do that again. Now we got a little bit. Variable offset by line. We'll pick this. We'll go to the inside. And so my rear yard will be 25 feet. And then my side yards are going to be 15 feet, 40 feet in the front, 15 feet. There we go. Now, this would then need to go on, say, um, some, this might be your your setback requirements, because I've got a 40-foot setback. I can't build, within that 40 feet to the frontage. And I've got, 15 feet on the side and 25 feet on the rear. That doesn't leave me a lot of room on this particular property, but that gives you a way of, creating something like that without having to, explode this, offset each of those individually, trim up the corners and rejoin the fans. Okay, so there's all kinds of little hidden jewels in these commands that you might not be aware of if you're used to doing them with the Carlson variations. Or I mean, if you're used to using the um, standard CAD commands, which you can do. There's no problem. But just be aware that you've got some extra advantages that the Carlson commands might give to you as you're working. Okay. So to point out that and to talk about a way of learning some of those, we're not going to have time to go through all of those different examples, but if we go back to our manual here and let's look at our command reference in our general menus. I'm going to have to come back to right here. All right, so one of the things that we've noticed, we talk about here, these are the commands on the file menu, the new open project, et cetera, et cetera. And then if we go to the edit menu, and this explains some of that a little bit better. That first paragraph there says the edit menu contains both standard CAD editing tools like move, copy, trim, rotate, offset, standard polyline, just like you've seen, as well as some of these Carlson enhanced variations on standard edit functions. Now, this is true of not just the edit menu, but most of these menus, there's particularly the fundamental area menus, they're all Carlson variations that have added to it. Okay. And so the way the command structure is in your book here, it says if the command is not listed below, then it's a standard CAD tool and is not described here. So you can see that the first one is the erase menu, because undo, redo, clipboard, erase, erase by, erase, select, single, last. Those are all standard CAD functions. So the first one that's a Carlson function is erase by layer. Okay, so here's how that works. Erase by closed polyline, erase outside. These are all some really tremendous tools. They give you a lot of power. And one thing to help you learn them is when you see in the manual here, some of these are going to be in red, in boldface, whereas others like temporary erase and copy to layer, multiple offset, those are not sort of featured. They're not highlighted in red. And the only thing that means is that in my experience of using the software, I have found those to be particularly valuable commands, the ones that are in red. Or it's either something that you don't think about, but has some really good functionality, or it's something that might be important to remember. Some of those, like say this copy to layer, I didn't have much need to ever use that particular command, but you might in your particular workflow. So don't take this as absolute. Just take this as, hey, this is what I found. You might want to take special note of those, and you can see, some of them are bolded in red, some are not. That doesn't mean ignore the other ones. That just means these are the ones that I find that I use all the time because they have some really good functionality. Okay. So that brings us back. Let's go back now to where we were on the points idea. And let's talk about what Carlson points are and using point groups. Now, let me ask you, since you're all surveyors, do you um, are you using point groups right now? Do you know how to set up a point group and do you use them or not? Do you want to, learn more about it, or is that just going to go over ground that you already covered?
If you could give us a little bit of coverage on it, it would be
Okay.
useful.
Okay, so I just I just don't want to spend any time doing stuff that you guys already know everything about. So just, if I get into areas like that, just make sure you tell me that, let's go on to the next topic. So because there's plenty to do. All right, so what we have, what is a Carlson point? We need to talk about what exactly a Carlson point is, and some of these concepts is what we're doing. So we're reading up here in this opening paragraph. It says Carlson does its work by really it just creates standard CAD entities. It's got points, lines, polylines, but it's going to use tools and settings that you're going to have it's going to become an intelligent object. So a CAD point is just that. It's just a one-dimensional point or a line of zero length. And Carlson can treat that as part of a larger object, which is a CAD block that contains that point entity. But Carlson gives us a way to create Carlson points as opposed to CAD points. A Carlson point will have a CAD point in it, but it gives us more than we would have just by using the CAD point, because we can now refer to it by a number and a description, and we can see on the drawing those numbers and descriptions and elevations and that sort of thing. So here's the idea. So you know what a point is. Obviously, it's just a location in space. Okay, it's got a X, Y, and Z coordinate value, or in survey talk, it would be a northing and easting elevation. It would be a Y, X, Z. And so here's an idea. So this particular drawn polyline, or series of three lines, if you will, are there points at those locations? And the answer is that in terms of CAD entities, no, there's not, just in general. But that drawn entity has vertices, it has a vertex at each one of those points. So it does define a point location, and we can use that even in our computations. We can use it. We don't have to have a Carlson point to exist, or even a CAD point to exist where those things are. However, if we do want to use Carlson points there, we have some tools. We can place them snapping to the endpoints, or we can tell it to automatically create points based on this, and it can walk along that and drop a point every time it gets to a vertex and that sort of thing. And I'll let you read some more of this sort of on your own. But then, so what happens when we have a Carlson point? What does a Carlson point consist of? And so a CAD point is just that. It is a point entity. A Carlson point object is often seen like this, with a point number, an elevation, a description, and a symbol, but it also includes this CAD point entity that's right there at that center of that symbol in that same place. Okay, so a CAD point is simply a single dot. Okay, and then um, so here's an example of a Carlson point block with the colors for the attributes all set to black. And it has a point number of 5 and elevation of 234.56, and has a description of point with symbol node. And it has a symbol here, and you don't see the little dot right there because we told it not to draw that CAD point. We typically do, but we told it not to in that case. In this example, we see that it did have the node, and it would normally, by default, look like this, just a dot, okay? But we changed the PD mode, this variable up here, to display that dot as an X instead. So you see the X superimposed right there over its location where our triangle got drawn as our point symbol, okay? So, so what can we do with those particular points that we have created? And they're basically, you can think of it as an enhanced point location that allows us to refer to that location by number and by description. Okay, and so right over there is an example. We've already gone through some of those drawing commands where we can use the point numbers if we use the Carlson commands to draw and not the standard CAD commands to draw. And it asks for a point or a point number, then we can say, you know, in this case, 5 to 13, 21 to 25, 30, 35. Where we do that, it can recognize those as a range of numbers. And by the way, point numbers can have letters in them. Okay, so it will recognize A through D. You know, it knows the alphanumeric sorting sequence. Okay, um, so let's take a look at that, and we're going to say draw a couple of points here. So let's if you have drawn anything into your drawing, like I've got these 5 points. I'm going to erase everything in the drawing. I'm going to choose edit, erase, select. And it's now going to prompt me to select the entities to delete. I'm going to type the word ALL. I hit enter. I would enter again. Now, my points are gone from my drawing. However, I've got points. If I go to the points menu and list points, I still see I've got those 5 points that we used, right? Okay. So they still live out there in that coordinate file. They're just gone from my drawing. So we're going to, in terms of this exercise now, we're going to get rid of that coordinate file, or not get rid of it. We're just going to decouple it. So we're going to set the current coordinate file to this file called exercise one coordinates. And we do that by choosing from the points menu. We're going to go points, set coordinate file. We'll go to points, set coordinate file. And when that comes up, we're going to look in our folder. And if you need to switch it, you can come up here to the top and it should show you the folders you've most recently been in. Down below, it shows you some of the recent files, regardless of the folder they're in. And then it will show you the files that are in the folder that you have selected up here, or you can go out and choose the browse button and go the Windows route, either way. So I'm going to choose this exercise one coordinates. And here's what I like about the Carlson file dialog as opposed to the Windows, is that it gives you things like over here in this data preview. It tells me that, hey, that's a Carlson alphanumeric coordinate file, and it has a point range of 1 to 22. It's got 22 points in it. And if it had a job description, a job number, and a date, it would show up there. It does have a date, didn't have a description. Okay, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to choose open, and now it's there, but there's nothing in the drawing yet. But if I go to my points menu and list points, just choose all, say okay, and I say, okay, well there I've got 22 points. There are no descriptions in those, it's just point data. Well, that's okay. All right, so there they are. So how do I get those into the drawing? Well, I'm going to go to the points menu and I'm going to draw or locate points. Now, draw locate means it's going to draw by reading from the coordinate file, or it's going to locate by me either screen picking or enter and assign a typed value. So I'm just going to say draw locate points, and I'm going to draw all. And down here at the bottom, I'm going to draw all. And there now are all 22 of those points. Okay. And there's 1 to 2 to 3. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. All right. So now try your hand at a couple of these things. We're going to draw a polyline. 1 to 22, your choice, etc., etc. So like if we now go to draw a 2D polyline, and I'm going to make that just changing things around here. Pick point or point numbers. So if you said 1 to 22, 1-22, boom, there it is, and it's waiting for you to keep drawing. You can keep click, 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 or snap something else, but it starts at 1, goes to 2, to 3, to 4, and now it is 2D. So if I spin this up in 3D space, I see the points are at a different elevation, but the yellow is down at the 0 elevation because that was my current elevation when I ran the command right up here. Okay. Now, by the way, if you're wondering how I got it to spin up like that, as a real quick way of checking some things, if you hold the shift key down with one hand and then press and hold the wheel on the mouse and keep all that held down and then push the mouse up, down, whatever, you can, use that to set that 3D viewpoint. You can also then, once you're ready, you can go back over and at the, the little view cube at the top, if you've got that, or if you don't have that, you can type the word plan, Plan, hit enter, and then tell it to do a plan view of the current coordinate system. All right, now contrast that with drawing a 3D line. So let's go to the draw menu and choose 3D polyline. And this time, if you don't see this options box, look down on the command line. You should see some options at the command line. Type O for options. And what I want you to do is uncheck the prompt for elevation or leave that one checked, I guess. But um, do you, do you have all three of these? This is new, this prompt for coordinate point elevations, as opposed to just prompt for elevation slope. It used to only have the two. I don't know if yours has the two or not. Two or three. Check boxes here. Anybody? Okay. Well, I'm going to uncheck for prompting, and I'm going to change my color to red so you can see that. And this time, I'm just going to type the word all. So it's going to start with, it's going to read that all, and it means to use all the points. So it's going to start with 1, go to 2 to 3, all the way around to 22. Now I've got a 3D line that goes from the elevation of each of those points and goes right through them, whereas the 2D line was down there at 0. Okay, now that's really fundamental to understanding some of this stuff in 3D because you're going to have this happen. You're going to see things like this, and you'll see them in plan view, and you won't recognize necessarily that there are two things there. And you could even, if you've got your selection cycling turned on, it makes it easy enough to find things if you're doubled up, but it could be different. So, and you could even, if the 2D line work, say, is showing first, all that means is I've just changed the draw order. That doesn't mean I've made it higher in elevation. You see my red line is still at my high elevation. Okay. Yeah, I've got a straight point down there I'm going to get rid of. All right. I'll take that and send it back to the background. Okay, so now again, remember we had that linking on where if we move points, if we move, say, this point 13, and if I say yes, because linking was on, the line work's going to go with it. Okay. If I take this red line off, and I'm going to go now to my settings, Carlson configure, general settings, and I'm going to uncheck link line work with points. And I'm going to say, okay, say exit. I'll draw a 3D polyline again, same settings. I'll say, okay. I'll type the word ALL, hit enter. There they are. Enter to finish. And now there was that point 13 again. I'll just move that one and I'll move it over here. Yes, I'll update it. And notice the yellow line moved with it because that was the value of that switch when the yellow line was drawn. It said link line work with points. But I've just now turned off the switch that says link line work with points when I drew this one again. And it did not go along for the ride. So if I want that to now go and be where point 13 is, I have to actually grab the grip, and then I'm going to hover over that attribute, make sure it's point 13 and click enter. Okay. So that's another example of that linking and how that works. Okay. So you might prefer to not have linking on. And just if you move a point, then just manually go and move the line to go with it. Okay, so it's up to you. All right, anybody have any particular questions at the moment? Everybody good? All right. So now to keep us from having our missing our break in the middle of the afternoon, we're going to break right here and then we'll come back and pick back up with these point groups, what we can do with the points and how we can work with these to see how we're going to be able to use the functionality of Carlson points. Okay, so I'm going to pause our recording. All right, so let's continue here. So we've gotten a number of different things that you've been able to see, whether that linking is on and off and how that behaves, and the fact that it's not, you can't just go in here and turn this off and then suddenly the things you've already drawn are no longer linked. It's whatever is in effect at the time that they were created is how all of those things work. Okay. And there's one more linking that we haven't talked about. I'll go ahead and demonstrate it for you here as well. If you
Can I ask a question quickly?
yes.
All right, when you were starting this exercise and you imported the coordinates from the exercise one coordinate file,
Uh-huh.
where you already had some points in the drawing, right? From the example before.
No, I erased everything out of my drawing. But if you
But then
did, it would tell you that you get ready to overwrite something,
Mhm.
or should have. It should have told you that, you've got a conflict.
Oh, because I didn't do that. And then now I have the points from the new coordinate file, which is
Yes. So
1 through 22, but I
yeah,
still
you
have
have you
1
have
through
one.
5 from the previous exercise.
Yeah, so erase those other previous points first and just erase. In fact, I would just go to
So is
uh
there a way to merge these two sets of points in one coordinate file?
oh yeah, you can do that, because let's say if I've got those 5 points, in fact, I'll do that. It's a good question to see how to handle that. So if I go to points and I'll go back to my previous coordinate file, which was, what did I call it? Class example for linking. Okay, so now I've got those 5 points and they're different. See, now I've got these 5 points and they're different from the 5 that I've got already shown in my drawing. In fact, they're way out here. I'm down,
Mm.
you know, the 0 and even negative coordinates, and these are going to be out in the 5,000 range. So, you know, how do I get those to merge into this particular file? Okay, so I'm going
Because
to,
there will be some points with the same number, right? So you have two ones and two twos and
yeah,
two five.
that's right. That's right. So if I draw locate these points, and I'm going to say, instead of erase duplicates, and I'm just going to say draw all. All right, so now those are my 5 points from way back before, but I've also got all of these points, right? And I've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 down here, but I've also got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out there. So, but now if I were to do anything like edit points and look at my coordinates in my point editing, that tells me that I've, you know, that's because I've got this file. If you look up here in this top stripe, I've got class example for linking.crd. That's my current coordinate file. Okay, so right now I want to be able to get these points into the file that has these points, or I want to get, if I want to put these points into this file, either way, it just depends on which file is current. Right now, the current file that I have, and you look up here at the top of the green stripe, it says Carlson Survey 2023, blah, blah, blah. CRD is class example for linking, or, and my drawing is still that class example for linking. So if, like what you did, you changed, and I'm going to go ahead and do that as well, you changed to this exercise 1 coordinates. All right, so now I exercise 1 coordinates and I list my points, and now I'm back to those 22 points. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 no longer match what they are out out here. Okay, but they're there, and I want to get those into my overall set of 22 points so that I had 27 points. Okay, so we do that with a couple of ways. We can go on the points menu, and we can say go to points utility, and we can you know, update the coordinate file from the drawing. Okay, we can do a number of things here, or we can uh, a lot of these individual commands under here, point utilities, are available up here in the coordinate file utilities. So I'm going to run it from there and show you some of that functionality. So you see, I've got 2 columns of buttons. I've got on the left things that work on the whole file, and on the right, I've got things that work on the points within this particular file. So I'm, or within this drawing as well. So if I choose from my file utilities, you can import, export coordinate points. And if I do that, I can import points into my current file. And right now I'm in the file that has 1 through 22. So I could do it that way. And so it doesn't even matter. I didn't even have to have them drawn into my drawing if I wanted. I could just come back here and say, go to that. And those are those 5 points, and it's getting ready to bring them into this particular coordinate file. That's one way to do it. I'm going to cancel that. I'll show you the other way is if I update the CRD file from the drawing. If I do that, then I'm going to say, well, get everything. That's my asterisk for my wildcard description match. And I'm going to say, okay. And it wants me to select any Carlson, land development desktop, Softdesk, Inroads, Eagle Point, Geodometer, Leica, or microsurvey points. So I'm going to just zoom out here, find those 5 points, and I'll grab those and hit enter. Now, it's going to come up and say, point 1 is already used. What do you want to do? So I can renumber that point starting with 23, or I could say start with 101. And I can, or I could overwrite, and I can say start with 101 and renumber the point from the end of the file. So, and then we'll just say renumber all, so it doesn't ask me for, oh, look at those elevations are close to the same. We got that. So if I say renumber all, it won't ask me for all 5 of them. It's just going to start with 101 and go and do that. Now, so I've created that with this update the coordinate file from the drawing. I selected those 5 points. I now list my points. Let's list them all. Let's say, okay. So there's my 1 through 22. And then here's my 101 through 105. Okay, upper left, upper right, lower left, and center out at the 5,000 range. Okay. Now, all of these things that you see here, this minimum, maximum, number of points listed, I've got up here my job description, job number. You may or may not see those in your listing. And if you don't, it's because, or the reason I do is because I say report the coordinate range. That's that bunch at the bottom. And I'm going to report the job header. That was the job description and all of that. And that gets set when you run your drawing setup down here. The project name, let's call this one Cayman survey class. That'll be our project name. It'll be job number 123-456. Project location is somewhere in the internet. And whoops, we'll spell that correctly. It's okay. Now, if I list my points, oops, let's locate points. I don't want to do that. I want to list points. So now you can see my job is, my project is Cayman survey class. Of course, I misspelled some, my somewhere in the internet, and there's my job number. Okay. Now, I don't know why. That should not have duplicated that. Be say okay to that. Maybe I would have to list points and turn that stuff off. So that's still, all right, so that's showing there because I put it in at that level. But if I tell it to report the job header, then that picks this up. See if I can find where that came from. Report job header. With job description, job name, job name. These can be set in the coordinate file utilities command. Oh, okay. So that's a separate thing. Edit the header. So there we go. So that is if, so that keeps that date. Wow, look at that date's way out of date. So if I put that in, it might just clear those out. And then when I list my points, if I uncheck that, I'll still get this because this business here, because that always is going to go at any of my reports because I set it in my drawing setups down here, my project name and location and job number. Okay, so that gets put in the header of any report that I run, just because I filled those out. If I didn't, it would just be blank. All right. So anyway, does that answer your question, how to get those points into the other ones?
Yeah,
And
that's clear.
yeah, so you can see how, that can be, and you can see how it can be really easy to get these misaligned. And I've got a client up here in West Virginia that um a lot of times he does a lot of survey work. He tries to resolve, points he measures out in the field with his GPS unit. He tries to get those to resolve back to his decomputed points. And so he's moving points around all the time. And sometimes he gets them moved, and then he puts them on a layer, and then he freezes that layer and he forgets about them. And then so they get moved and some don't get moved, and everything's sort of out of whack. And um, so they can sort of get out of sync, and you have to know and how to get those back into play, and which ones may or may not be in the right location. So, but again, we have the tools to do it. And if we don't know, we can go back to points, coordinate file utilities. Remember, I told you on that switch to set on that we're going to maintain the coordinate file history. And right down here is the history, this point history button at the bottom. Right. So I choose that, and I've got a history file. And here are the commands. I updated the coordinate file from the drawing that took care of these points here. I did draw locate points with these. Drawing edited, links are on. Here's my points. And you can see some are adjusted, some are not. Here's that point 13. And remember when I moved that point 13 to show the line moving with it? That's why it's showing that it got adjusted, but these others had not been moved. And here's some other commands that were brought in. So you can, and if you choose to say delete down to here, uh, or delete, through any given point or any given command or through a particular point, it takes all of the things that were done down to that particular point. Okay, so it's not like, so you got this undo through selected. So you can choose, how many to do. And again, there's that group. We're going to talk about groups here in just a second and how that can help us do our work. All right. So there's a lot of power in this utilities business. I would say let's, get comfortable with using that and keep track of what's going on. Because again, you can have points in the drawing and you may not even have a coordinate file open. Okay, or you can have points in a coordinate file that do not exist in the drawing. And you can also have something like this, where I'm going to just take everything and erase it all. And if I want to draw a 2D polyline, and I'm going to draw it from, say, 1 to 22 again. Well, notice it did, but it didn't draw the points. The points don't even have to be in the drawing, because point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., all of that have a value in the coordinate file. So it reads it out of that current file and draws it. And in fact, if I take this point number 13, which is right here, and choose to, let's go and edit my file. So I'm going to go down here to find point 13, and let's just set it back to, let's see, right now it is at -3. So let's make it -425. We'll make it the same easting as the point above it. So I'm just going to copy that and I'll paste it right there. I'll save and exit. And of course, I was expecting that to react because it went through that point, but it didn't. So apparently for that linking to work, it's got to be, the point has to be in the drawing for that to work. But if I redraw, let's do another one. 222. Yeah, so there, you see, I brought that point over to be directly underneath that point. So you can see I made that change, but the linking didn't work because it wasn't still in the drawing. Had I drawn in point 13, no, I didn't mean to do that. So there's now is point 13. So if I make a change, we'll call it mod. Or let's see if we move it. Yeah, okay, so it's not that linking will not apply. I'll make sure I've got the linking turned back on. Yeah, it's linked. So I drew it with linking on, but I drew it with the points that were in the coordinate file and not in the drawing. And so that will not allow the linking to happen. I would have to have the points in the drawing when I draw the line work with point numbers for the linking to work, because it's a change in position that it's really trying to keep track of in the drawing. So anyway, just, being aware of how all that stuff works, should be, some useful, functionality for you. Now let's talk about point groups, to round some things out. And, this is all well and good. And like, maybe you have a habit of saying, like, all of your control points, say, start at 101 and go up to 199, or, you've got certain things. All of your topo points are going to start at 1001. Maybe you work that way, or, um, maybe, you're merging points from different crews when different data collectors are coming in and you're bringing them in from different days. So to help you keep track of all that stuff, instead of trying to remember and memorize and understand all this, which point numbers do what, that you can make point groups, and you can make point groups based on pretty much anything. You can base it on the description. You can base it on the point numbers. You can base it on the position that they are on the ground. You can base it on when they got put into the coordinate file. So like if you did a data collector dump into a file and then you merged those into your new coordinate file. In fact, if you remember, or if you noticed it, if I said merge or import export coordinate points, I'm going to go into a file. I'm going to take them from here. Notice down here, this last option says create a point group. So that would be the points that come in from that new file. I can call those a particular group. In fact, I could have done that with those 5 that we had out there before. Okay. So, and you can also, instead of taking, the whole range of all those points, if that particular coordinate file that I just selected have defined groups in it, then, you can select out of that group, out of that bunch of points, you can select by the group. And that's really where the power of the grouping comes into these point groups, is that we can give them names and just refer to them as a collective group of points. So a given point can belong to any number of independent groups. They don't have to, like if a point's in one group, doesn't mean it can't be in another group if it makes sense to be there. So let's talk about this. So let's open up this, let's follow these steps here. We're going to open a CAD file called civildemo.dwg, and we're going to open a coordinate file to exercise 2 point groups. So this is on page 15 of your manual under the exercise point groups, so we want civil demo. So I'm going to go ahead and close this file, and I'm not going to save it. And I'm going to choose open file. I'm going to navigate my way to my current set of files here, and I'm going to choose civil demo. That a minute to load, and I'm going to now go to set. I'm going to go points, set coordinate file, and I'm going to set that to exercise 2 point groups and open that. Okay. Now, if we look at this, let's turn on our inquiry menu. We'll turn the drawing inspector on and off. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to uncheck this display elevation, display poly. I'm just going to look at my layer names. That's the only one I've got. So I'm going to now just hover the mouse, and I see I've got a contour line on a layer called topo. I've got this blue line that goes down through it as my stream. I've got my roads. I've got my perimeter. I've got buildings. I've got driveways. I've got CL for center line. I've got lot lines. There's that perimeter again. I've got trees. I've got lot numbers. I've got over here spot text, C text, that stands for contour text, I would imagine. All right, so I've got a number of different things in here that make up this file, okay? And that was just one way of taking a peek at it. So I'm going to right click and turn off the drawing inspector. Another little example, let's go to the inquiry menu again and turn on the layer inspector, not the drawing inspector, but the layer inspector. And I'm going to see my drawing. I'm going to tell it that I want to zoom and isolate and restore on exit. And I'm going to choose down here different layers. There's now my layer called buildings. So it isolated and it zoomed to all the things on layer buildings. Here's CL for center line. So I've got 2 center lines. We've got a side street coming into this street and a little cul-de-sac out here. Contour text. DIS TXT is a layer, but you see it has an entity count of 0, so there's nothing in it. Now, you can also do multiples. So I've got buildings selected. I'm going to hold the control key down and choose lot lines, and I'll see them both. Let's see, maybe I'll also do a perimeter. All right, so this gives you another way of working with your drawing that you can identify some things. You also can do things like, let's go to the lot numbers, and you could say erase those entities. So if you were to choose that button right there, it would erase these 14 entities, at which point the purge button would become active. So if I look at the final layer and I see there's nothing on it, entity count 0, my purge button is active, so I can actually delete the layer itself out of the drawing just with this command. Okay. Now, notice nothing is showing because, or let's say maybe we'll just have lot lines showing. And so because I have restore view on exit, when I choose exit, it's going to put everything back the way it was. Okay. So I've sort of got a good idea of what's in my drawing, but we're starting to talk about our point groups. So let's take a look at the points that we have. Let's go to the points menu. And remember, we set the coordinate file to exercise 2-point groups. So let's list our points. And we choose OK. And we see that I've got a bunch of points here in this coordinate file. A bunch of them that have a description of BDY, that stands for boundary. And then there's a boundary radius point, because I do have some circular arcs that were part of that boundary, and it computed the radius points for them. I've got some points called a description that says building. I've got some that say EOP, again with radius points. There's some more building. P-core for property corners, and there's some more buildings. Now, how did those happen? Notice I've got these 4 buildings have 0 elevation. So that tells me that they are not at a given elevation when those were created. And I can indeed probably, it looks like they've been elevated since. Okay. So, the way that particular coordinate file was done was this. I had taken the original drawing, which had no points in it, and I chose to isolate layers. And I did these one at a time, and I said, let's isolate those, okay? And then I went to the Pogo menu, and all the way down at the bottom, I have this one that says create points from entities. So I chose that, and I didn't necessarily draw the points. I'm just going to create the points. And I chose to, I gave it a starting point number. I gave it descriptions. I said the same description for all points. And for instance, on this one, I said BLDG. And, I can then say, okay. And then of the things that I'm going to choose, which will be these, what do I want to process? Well, I could, have all of these checked, or just look at polylines, or look at polylines and text and blocks, which are inserts. And if it's on a curve, I can say skip the radius points or not, and skip the midpoints or not. And then avoid any duplicates, et cetera, and say, okay, would select these, give them all that same description. So that's how these points were created. Was I did that individually. I did some for buildings. I did some for this. I did, I think for the boundary, I isolated this layer. I gotta, so I isolated that from my boundary, even though that's really the boundary layer, and this is the, it's not a boundary layer, it's the catch line of the grading for the road. Okay, so I don't know, I don't think we did anything with that one. And then the lot lines are these particular layers here that, again, we put those things in to, driveway points. We turned on we selected all the driveways, said generate points on, all of those polyline vertex locations. Okay, so this guy here, for instance, let's say it's a layer called trench. It probably should be on a layer called building. There's one called driveway. So I'm going to match. I'm going to use that little paintbrush up there and match the properties. I'm going to set this building and that building. So that would be maybe a building, but it's off our property, so we're not going to worry too much terribly about it. All right. So what do we have here are these points that got created, but we don't have any point groups necessarily. So if I go to the points menu, and choose Point Group Manager. And this is just a way to help me make a point group. And again, you can do that with a number of different commands. Like when you draw a field to finish, it's going to allow you to create a point group when you do that draw. If you import points, like if you do a data collector load, you can make a point group of all of those points that come into the drawing. Let's say you might give it, the name of the crew chief or the date that the field crew brought the data collector in and brought the points in. You might make that a group that's based on the date, the current date. So any of these ways that are going to help us keep track of these points. All right. So right now we've got this little point group manager, and we see that there are a couple of little pull down menus where you can create a point group, edit the group, delete it, copy it, import it, and you've got all these buttons down here on the bottom which do basically the same thing. You've also got these points where you can insert them into the drawing, erase them from the drawing. These are all a bunch of points or commands like draw, locate, or erase, or run a report. That's like a list points, that kind of stuff. But this works on the group level, and they're just here for convenience sake. You don't even really need to have these things here. They can all be done from these other commands back here on the points menu. All right, so let's get started. Let's create some point groups. So I'm going to say my new point group is going to pop up. I'm going to come up here and give it a name, and I'm just going to call this one all points, all PTS. And just a global, I can give it a description if I want. I'm just going to say include all. That's all I need to do, and say save. Now I've got a group called all points that includes, all points. Okay. So let's make another one. And this one we're going to call prop core for property corners. Okay. Now here's where I'm going to uncheck include all. And I'm going to, and you can see the different ways you can choose it. You can use a point list where you can just type point numbers, or you can even edit the list by picking from a list of those that you've made if you used a point list. If not, you can also select from the drawing, select from a coordinate file. You can do all those different things. You can choose it by a range of elevations, or you can choose it by descriptions. And if you choose by descriptions, if you know what the descriptions are, you can type them separated by commas. You can set by a particular selection so that if you select a point in the drawing, it will take those descriptions and use it. We don't have any points in the drawing yet, but we're going to set from a list. Now, remember the point group we're making is called prop core, property corners. And we had two different things. We had these perimeter points that were part of the boundary, the outside boundary. And we also had these other points called P core for our property corner. Those would be like these interior property corners that we have. Okay, so I'm going to set up here and choose boundary. And I'm going to scroll down here till I find P core. And I'm going to hold the control key down and just choose one of those. So I've now chosen two different descriptions. And when I say okay, it's going to come back and say BDY and PCOR, and I'll say save. Now, prop core has all of the points that had those descriptions, but notice there's something that's missing from those. If I go back to my all points, you see I've got some BDY radius points, and I've got some EOP. I don't see any P core radius points, but I do have some radius points. So they're there. so if I go back to my prop core and I want to edit that group, I can choose that edit button or just double click it. And I can say BDY, and if I put an asterisk in there, meaning choose any point description that starts with the BDY and then ends with anything else. So there's BDY rad point. Now, if I had some points that had like 1, 2, 3 space BDY space something else, I would have to put an asterisk in front of the BDY as well. Okay. So just sort of know what you want. Now, in our particular case, I'm going to take out those radius points just to leave them off. And I'm going to do that for a particular reason, because I'm going to use these point groups to draw as part of my plat the property corners. Okay. So I've now got property corners. Let's make another one called buildings. And I'm going to, again, uncheck include all. I'll turn my description on, set from list. There's just building. I don't think there's any. Yeah, that's it. Building. I've got EOP. All right, so I got building. There's that. I've got those. Let's make another one called road stakeout. All right, now this is going to be where I uncheck include all, I choose, and that's my EOP, but I'm going to make sure I choose the EOP and the rad point. So I'm going to say EOP and a star, because I want to be able to stake those radius points of my edge of pavement if I'm staking out the road. Driveway, you can create driveway. Now you can do this one of two ways. We've been doing all of this from the include tab. If you say include all, but then go to the exclude tab and say, I want to exclude, everything but. So you can say these and these, and what are we getting? Driveways. So I'm excluding boundary 10, building, edge of pavement, radius point, property corner. Actually, it looks like there aren't any driveway points at all. Okay, so now if I say that, it should come back and say no points. So there's my, what I should have changed to driveway. There's not any. I just said get rid of those other descriptions. So one thing you can do though, let's go back and edit that more like what it should be, is let's uncheck that. We will include by description. I'm just going to call this description DW and save it. I'm going to go to exclude, and I'm not going to exclude any rules, but I will include everything that says DW. And I don't have any that say DW right now, so my point group's empty. So say, okay, we're done. We've got those point groups established. Now let's create the points on the driveway. So let's go to our view menu and choose isolate layer, just to keep it nice and easy to select. So I've got a bunch of things that are driveways. To generate the points along all of those driveways so that I could redraw them if I needed to, or stake them out if I need to do it that way, I'll go to my Kogo menu, create points from entities. And again, I'm not going to draw the points. I'm just going to have it read these. I will locate on the real Z. I will use point numbers, and let's start these point numbers, say at 201, just to keep them as a group. point order will be in by order, left to right, top to bottom, bottom to top. So we'll just say by selection. I'm going to give the same description, or let's use the entity layer for the description. That will be, well, actually it'll say driveway, but let's say same description, and we'll give that description DW. Okay. So I will now say, okay, polylines is on. I will uncheck the radius and midpoints for the arcs. Maybe I'll skip the midpoint, but I will get the radius points. Let's do that. Avoid any duplicates, draw due points, and I'm not going to draw them at all. And I'm going to draw any points. Just say okay. Select these because they're isolated. I just grabbed a big window around it. It now tells me I created 180 points and I avoided 12 duplicates. That's because some of those might have lined up with some of the other points. Now, let's go back to our points menu and list points. And this time, instead of listing by all or whatever, let's do a point group listing. And now you see I've got driveway, so that automatically, even though it was empty when I was making the group, because I said use DW points, it found all of the DW points, but what's missing? Those radius points, right? So if I just double click it, oops, sorry. If I had to go back to my points, point group manager driveway, and I need to put an asterisk there to pick up those others. So now I get those radius points. Okay. So nice little way of handling all of these, various points and work through them by group. If you wanted to list all of the points that you want to, or if you want to stake out a point, if you go to, let's go to the Kogo menu and let's choose radial stakeout, for instance. And if we stake out, we have a particular point number, well, we just use 1 and 2. You would set this up and say, okay, but we're going to now, this computes all of these stakeouts from that setup. But if we do that again, 1 to 2 minutes, I range of points to compute 1 to 380. I wanted to do that by group. It won't, I don't know why it's, I think, yeah, it's not. All right, so bad example of that. But if I wanted to say, copy those points into a different, put them in a data collector to go stake them out, then I can import export from the current file to a new file called stakeout selection method by, let's choose a group, and we're going to stake out all the buildings. Okay. So that has now included those. I didn't have to keep track of everything. I'm ready to go with that. And then I'm going to say, okay. And I'll now exit that. And if I look at that point file, I set my coordinate file to that stakeout coordinate file. And if I, let's see, let's set coordinate file, stakeout. I look over here, I've got point range goes from 16 to 144. There's 84 points in it. If I list that set of points, just all, say okay. And there are all of the building points only. So those would be the ones that I would dump into the data collector to go out and stake out. Okay, and I'm going to go back to set my coordinate file to, I had exercise 2 point groups. And now my point groups are still here. And they're going to help us do some other things. So if I'm if I'm drawing, I'm gonna get rid of this. Let me see. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not part of the perimeter. Okay, so if I want to create, if I want to stake out this this property, and it's basically, this, I think so. That's basically my lots. I'm going to have another lot line in here I need to create, but so I can do that. I've got some points. Remember, I've got some points that say they're called perimeter, or I'm sorry, they're called BDY. And those are the points that are all along this outer boundary. They came from that perimeter. There's other points that say, get to them. Boundary, building, EOP, building, P-core, yeah. So these points that say P-core, those are these interior property corners. All right, so they're two different groups by description, but they are all in this group called property corners. Oops, property corners. See, they're all the boundary descriptions and the P-core descriptions. All right. So if I wanted to, I'm going to restore those layers back. So if I'm making a survey plat here, and I want to put a little circle around, where each of these go, like say, I may not recognize, exactly where that is. That's the end of this arc and then starts a straight segment, so I may not be able to just dump a point. Let's see, that it goes from here to here. That's an actual arc in there I can see. But I may not know exactly where these points are to be able to put a little symbol for those property corners. But that is, this parcel 81 has a property corner right here at the end of this white line, as well as one back here on the back line, and one over here at the end of that white line, up here on the front, and back and forth accordingly. So how could you do that if you wanted to, say, put symbols down for those points? Now, obviously, you could do that, isolate that, and then you could say, draw locate points, and you can start snapping to the endpoints of all these things. But if you miss one in there, like that, see, that one is right here. So you might look at that and think the arc goes from here to here and it stops, and then it starts here with a straight line. It goes out here, but it doesn't. The arc actually continues past this one and goes on to there. So, you can't necessarily just do that, or you run the risk of missing things. So what we can do instead is, let's use our point groups. We know the property corners. We've got every property corner, and it's correct. I've got all the ones that form this. I've got all the ones that came from the white one. Okay, so let's do a couple things. If we draw the points, draw locate points. Now remember, we typically will get a point number, an elevation, and a description. But I'm going to, in this particular case, I'm going to change a couple of things just for this. I'm going to uncheck descriptions, elevations, and point numbers. Okay. And I'm going to put this on a layer called, just don't, okay, let's just, well, put it on V node. Let's put it on a layer called PNTS-BDY, boundary points. And I'm going to change the symbol. I've got a different category of these different symbols. And the reason I'm going to do this will become evident here when we draw these. I'm going to change it to from the points, I'm going to choose points and wipeout. And I'm going to choose this SPT4 underbar W. And what this will be is it's got a little wipeout in the interior. So it's going to hide the line work that comes underneath it. Okay, when we draw the points. So this should be all I need. I'm going to say now, instead of just draw all or everything else, I'm going to choose draw the point group. So if I draw the point group, I want to draw my property corners and say, okay. And now there is, and let me do a regen all. Again, there's that view resolution variable. And I've also got a wipeout frame that is showing, and I want it to not show. So I turned it off, and then I do a regen, and now I can see that my corners show. My wipeout is hiding the lines that go underneath the corners. Now, you could have something, maybe you've modified some of this and it changes the draw order. You get some that look like this. You say, oh, well, I thought they were supposed to be hidden under there. Well, it's simply because the lines were modified that they got brought forward. So you would select one of those, either the lines, or let's say I'm going to take that point and I'm going to say select similar. And I'm going to look out here and I see that it's got all of those different points. And I'm going to right click and choose draw order, bring them to the front. And so now they're again hiding the lines underneath it. So we didn't trim the lines, and there is a command to do that, but that shortens the lines up. I don't want to do that. I want those lines to always go to the corners. All right, so now I've got property corners showing along all of my log corners, except for a couple that I see like right here. What happened there? Well, one got missed. Or maybe one was a duplicate point, so it didn't get created. So it's simple enough. If we just do a points, draw locate points, this time I'm going to give it a description of, let's see, where's my, this is going to be called a P core point. So I'm going to say screen pick, and I'm going to grab that endpoint. And so it just dropped it down there, and now I hit enter to finish. Now that's a point, but if I double click it, I see that because I didn't put the actual point group, it didn't, so that's just a dropped block. Okay. Same as this one over here, just individual blocks. Now that particular point location, if I look at my points, I'm going to edit points this time into my spreadsheet editor. And I'm going to come all the way down here. You see that didn't give me an actual point, because when I said draw locate points, I had this description, elevation, and in particular, point numbers were off. So if I had had the point numbers on, I could have given a point number and a description to that when I picked that point, and then I could, still go back and treat it like this other. So now I've just used those points to create all of these individual points in my point groups. So if I go back and erase this stuff and try to redraw it, this one is not going to be in that unless I create a point that has a description and I give it that description to make it part of that point group. Okay. So now you can see up here where it found that actual end of that arc. But in the case of this piece of property, it goes from that corner to this corner as an arc segment, and then it's a straight segment from this corner to that corner. So it's picked all that up. Now, a couple of things you may notice. If I've got what look like, 78, 980, I've got these lot numbers that go around through my individual properties. Well, 78 and 79 don't, there's a lot line missing, correct? So how would you go about recreating that lot line if, let's say, the intent was to be that you essentially split from midpoint to midpoint those two lots? Okay. So you might think of it as this. If we draw a 2D polyline, I'm going to go from that corner to that corner. Notice that's an arc, so that's there. I'll draw it again from this corner to this corner and hit enter. Now, let's isolate some layers here again. So if I were to draw a line, or I'm going to draw a 2D polyline, and I'm going to put it on this, set my color to be by layer. And if I go from the midpoint of that line to the midpoint of that line, well, that sort of gets the intent of going, halfway between the two back points to halfway between the two front points. And then I could trim this guy off from here to the intersection of that. And I could wow, it's not going to work with that one. Okay, that's no problem. So I can then extend that one to there, and that would, and then of course get rid of these two lines, and that would perhaps suffice. Okay. Now, did I split those two lots exactly in the middle? Well, I don't know, because I don't know if these arcs are concentric. My bearing, this bearing should be the bisector of these two lines that go out and meet at the center of this arc. There's some assumptions that you can make, but it's not guaranteed. So let's take a look at those two parcels. Let's take a peek at their areas. Let's go to the area layout, and let's choose area by interior point. I'm going to pick a point inside the area there. And that's going to be a lot description of 78. And so that's going to be there. And let's do one here. And it's 79. And I'll place it here. And it looks like, well, yes, indeed, it was exactly correct. Let's do one more. Okay, so it looks like those are all working out correctly as to what they should be. But let's suppose, though, that they were not necessarily. So we got 12.9 or 12,950. I'll just erase these labels here. So let's maybe I've just swung this around to be like that. So these are no longer the same area. Now, I realize that a lot of what you all do does not necessarily involve setting property boundaries and you know, the deed stuff, but you can extend this to be, you know, more than just for property ownership. Maybe you need to divide a large area into equal areas, or some given target area. Maybe instead of you know, you want exactly to be, say, a quarter acre instead of 0.29 or whatever it was. So there's a couple of things you can do with that. Is all of these area and layout commands, if you adjust the area, you've got two very common, well, here's another three. One is an aerial radial from a curve. But if we do a hinged area, now I've moved this one around, I'm going to choose, it says define the area by points or a closed polyline. Well, I'm going to need to do this by points. And I'm just going to go from here to here. Oh, this is actually not going to work exactly. Actually, I need to do a closed polyline. So let's do that first. If I do I'm going to come down to the draw menu and choose a boundary polyline. And I'm just going to pick inside, you know, select right there. And that's good. I will select that and give it a different color so we can keep track of it. All right. So now, if I choose the adjust areas by a hinged side, I'm going to choose by line work. And here's the segment that I want to adjust. Selecting the hinge point is back here. Keep the existing polyline. I'll say no. I'll just change it. And oops. Did I miss here? I choose that. Select the hinge point, that. Keep existing, no. There we go. I must have mispicked something. So it computes what that area is. It's now 10,948.95 square feet. And I need to give it a target area. And so I want to make that one to match the other one as 12,000, was it 950? Or 095? I think it was 095. Okay, so that now, except that wasn't the right, let me see, area by interior point. Was 950. Okay, so we need to do that one again. Is adjust the area, a hinged area. We'll take this red, or by line work, take this red line. From there, no, we're not going to keep the existing. We're going to go 12,950 instead of 095. All right, so that now we'll put it back. I will take this, which was my original lot line. I'm going to move it up to there. And now I'm going to get rid of that closed polyline because I just used it to do the computations. And so now if I go back to these area by interior point, I'll pick here. It is 79. And I'll pick here, and it is 78. And it still missed it by a skosh. Well, anyway, so we can do some maneuvering to make sure that we get things you know, we can have some adjustments to where we know we need to make this a particular area. So we can, if we include, if we make that into a solid, I don't know why it missed that. If I draw my boundary poly, pick inside. Name. Just go to maybe because this is on an arc out here. There we go. That's the finished area by line work. Choose the red line. There's my hinge point. No remainder yards, acres. Enter the target area 12,950. Now, if I close polyline, good. I do by interior point. By interior point. What's going on? Area by interior point. So pick in there. Oh. It's not. Did it not close? Yes, it's closed. So I by interior point that way. All right, so there's the 12,950. So it is correct now. Someone I must have missed something in there. So I'm going to take now this particular line. I'm going to draw a 2D polyline from that point to that point, and now get rid of this red line that I no longer need. And if I area by interior point, wow, what's going on? Okay, so that's well, it thinks that's where it is. It's just zoomed in so tight, so it should be okay. Area by interior point. See, that's not right. something about this that it doesn't like. There we go. 79. And here 78. Yeah, so there now we've got back to that original intent. We've now got those points. Well, we've got that new lot line established. If we restore our layers, you see we've got all the property corners except for on the ends of that. So you could do that very same thing. Draw either points, or we can just go to the draw menu and choose draw symbols and do the same thing. That same symbol, the SPT4 with a wipeout on a layer name called, what did we put them on? I think we said points boundary. Yeah. And it has a size of, what is my, at a 50 scale. So it'd be 4s, that'd be right. So do a point symbol on points boundary. Just snap there and snap there. Okay, so there we go. And so hopefully you've seen an example of how you can use grouping to generate, something that you can speed through where you're trying to, come up with. Here's another example. There's the end of that point. So that's an actual property corner, but there's no lot line to it. It's just part of that outside boundary. So again, by using those point groups, I didn't have much to do here. I just, used the group. I said, draw symbols wherever those point groups happen to fall, and that picks up all of these ones that I may have missed. And so that lets me add that to my property plat and show my corners as we go on. Okay. And there's some other things we'll see tomorrow when we come back. We're going to take a look at this little exercise that also shows nicely on how to use the books. We're going to work on this. It'll be a little stockpile. Okay. And we're going to then be able to take the points that are along the outside edges, because they have a specific description. We'll make a group out of them, a group out of the interior points, and then we're going to, generate the terrain for that, and then design a borrow pit to be able to cut out a particular amount of material that we might want to take out of that, and then generate a little haul road to come up into our borrow pit and go from there. Okay.
Yeah, Ken, just
Yes,
a
sir.
point of correction. You say
Yeah.
tomorrow, I thought it's supposed to be on Tuesday next
Yeah,
week.
that is correct. I started to try to tell you that I normally teach this class in a back-to-back fashion, but
Okay,
for us, it will be the day 2, which will be Tuesday of next week.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's going to give us till then. Now, that being said, up to this point, let me open up your all's microphones and let you ask me any specific questions on anything that you might have run into here. Have you learned, maybe some a little more depth of how you can work with this stuff, or anything that you'd really need to get more meat on, or do you see how this stuff is starting to shake down into, how this stuff works? So let me just sort of open up the discussion. Let me know any questions. And just remember, you all are all muted, so,
One quick question.
okay?
When you isolate a layer,
Yes.
how do you go back to
Okay, how do you do?
the
Yeah,
original view with all the layers?
yeah, so to be able to isolate specific layers or specific objects, there's a couple of ways, or two things that you can do. And one of those is, let's say I'm going to actually freeze the lot numbers and the tree lines, let's say. And that's going to be the way, oh, let me do one more here. I'm going to freeze also these spot text. All right, so I've got my contours, my contour labels and everything else, but I've frozen a couple of layers. So, and if I look at those in here and I scroll down, here's one that's, sorry, here's one, lot numbers are frozen. My spot text is frozen and my trees are frozen. Okay, so I want to keep that same configuration, but I want to be able to isolate these and turn them on and off. So what this is on the view menu, and right down at the bottom part is these two, or these particular sets of commands. There is a, first of all, the layer control, and that brings up the layers dialog. But there is a isolate layers and a restore layers. And what that does, when you say isolate, now remember we have those 3 layers that are frozen right now. So if I isolate layers, I'm going to just pick the driveways and the edge of pavement. So I run that command and it asks me to select. So I just select any one representative item on that layer and then pick the next layer. And then I can hit enter to finish my selection. And so that's now isolated that by itself. And if I look at what it did behind the scenes, you see all of these other layers got frozen temporarily, okay? But I don't have to go back to the layer manager and take care of handling that. I need to go back to where it used to be. And that was your question, I believe, was it not, Percy, is how do you put that back on? And that's, you go back to the view menu
Right.
and you choose restore layers. Okay, so that comes back with those 3 layers that we froze earlier are still frozen because that was the state at which it took over and isolated. Now, I did it from up here real quickly because I didn't want to pull down this. I've got this toolbar right here called layers that is right here, this toolbar there. And it is, if I can get it, I can't get it back where, let's see, there it is, back to where it was. And that is a layers toolbar that has these commands on it. It's got isolate layers, restore layers. It's got freeze layer by pick, meaning if you just click on something, it freezes the whole layer immediately. Or it's got freeze layer where I can pick a bunch of things and see the items that I pick and it highlights them. And when I'm through picking, it then does the freeze. And then I've got this one which says thaw a particular layer. And if I do that, it's going to then ask me, or, it's going to thaw the last one that I froze. So I'm going to go back and turn that back off. Or I've got this one that says thaw and turn on all layers. And so that does exactly what you think is if you ran the layer manager, selected all your layers and thawed and turned them on so that everything is visible all at once. Okay. So that's one way of doing it. And I do it from the toolbar because I use this all the time and it just is handier for me. But again, it's on the view menu and it's down here, this isolate and restore. Now there's another set of tools, and it's also up there near that, and it's still on that same toolbar, and I'll show you there where it is in a minute, but it's this one right here where we have show hide by selection. And it's on, again, it's a view type thing. So I can hide by selection, meaning it's going to ask me to pick something that I want to hide, or I can isolate something by selection or show them all. Now, this means instead of working on a layer by layer basis, it works on a selection set. So if I need to hide, let's say I'm working in here and I want to hide these contour lines, but not all of them, just the ones that are crossing over my way. So if I choose uh, show hide by selection, hide by selection, if I pick this one and say maybe this one, I hit enter, notice it looked like it froze those things. In fact, it did. It put them on a temporary layer in memory and froze that layer, but they're actually still part of the drawing. And to get them back, we would just go to view, show hide by selection, and say show all, and it puts them back. Now notice it did not thaw those layers we had frozen. Okay. Likewise, you can do, instead of a hide, you can do a show or isolate by selection. So if I wanted to isolate these 3 buildings and their driveways and that one edge of pavement and nothing else, so that's like isolate layer, but it doesn't isolate, the entire layer, only the things that you pick. So it's a nice little way of being able to get some clutter out of your way while you're working. Now, and then you turn it back on by choosing show hide, show all. Now notice how awkward that is to have to keep jumping back up here and finding the menu. So if you look up here on this layers toolbar, all the way over here to the right, there's the hide by selection, isolate by selection, and show all. So if I isolate by selection, I'm going to work on just, say these 2 buildings and that property line. So there now, and I can do all my work, get everything done. I'm ready to go. I'm going to go back. I'm going to come up here and just show all and turn it back on. So in the AutoCAD world, and I'm not sure what your OEM version does, but full AutoCAD, there is a command or a menu choice. If you select a couple of things and if you right click, you'll see a command here that says isolate objects. And then you can pull that to the right and it says either hide or isolate. And then it end object isolation. That's part of standard AutoCAD. I don't think it's in the OEM version that you have, but Carlson gives that to you. That's why Carlson wrote that command, because it might not be in these older versions of AutoCAD. And then you've got some other things here that you've got up here where I do this freeze by pick and freeze. You've also got turn off by pick and turn off by selection. So that's the difference between freeze and thaw and on and off. Okay, and here's another one where you can set a particular level, which assigns a level name to a selected entity. So if I wanted to put this on the driveway level, I could select that, choose that object, or I'm sorry, that one right there, set level, and choose driveways, I think, select. Well, I'm not sure that worked. Well, let's see. No, not turn on. Here, select level. Screen pick. If I choose this, or about this. level set. Screen pick. You know what? It's not working over here. That might be an AutoCAD only type of thing. Anyway, it lets you pick. It's sort of like matching. You can tell it, I want to put this on the same level as this or same layer. Oh, wait a minute. Let me see. That might have explained it. It says, oh yeah. Okay. It says set level. So it is working, but it's only would work on MicroStation files that use levels instead of layers. Okay. There's another command that I have out here as part of this
So
toolbar.
that would be the same as match prop.
Yes, it would be like match properties, except match properties does more than just set the layers. It also sets line types and things like that as well. Color, etc. But setting level here, that's for
Just the
MicroStation.
layer only.
Yeah. So that would be much like, yeah, and that would be the way I would do it here in AutoCAD is I would just do match properties. And I would say, you know, to go take that and put that on the same, you know,
Okay.
type stuff. Okay. Anything, anybody else? It was a good little question, good example to go down into some real productivity tools. So you, once you know what are there and what's good, particularly use these toolbars to help you get to them quickly. Okay. Anything else for anybody thinks of, that might think of? Everybody good? Or everybody really just wants to go home and have a nice cold one?
I think that's it, the latter.
Okay. All righty, that'll work. Well, I'm gonna do that very same thing, although I do have choir practice tonight. My wife and I are in the choir at our church, and we play instruments and sing sometimes some special things. So but that does not keep us from enjoying a nice cold one because it's been a long day. So
Definitely.
we'll
Yes,
do,
it does.
we'll do that, and we'll give thanks to the Lord for a nice cold beer. So, all right, gentlemen. Well, I will see everyone again on Tuesday or whoever else comes back for that. And I will, I'll send those links out, you know, prior to Tuesday's class. You don't need to download any new data or training books. And then we'll get into, you know, the further examples. We're going to get into the terrain modeling, and field to finish is one of the big things. I really want to hit that pretty heavy so you guys can start to use that and get some good productivity out of it. All right.
All
And
right.
in the
All right, no
meantime,
problem.
in the meantime, prior to that, if you think of any questions, please just drop me a line. You got the email in the book there. And Darren and James have my email and phone number directly in the signature block of any of the emails that I've been sending. Please feel free, get in touch however you need to, and I'll be glad to answer any questions or whatever else between now and Tuesday. You don't have to wait. But otherwise, I will see everyone on Tuesday. All right?
See you on Tuesday. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Absolutely. You guys
Have a
take,
good day. Thank you.
You too.
okay, take care now.
What?